Good afternoon, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Thank you all for coming out today on World Water Day for a discussion of innovations from development to delivery, working with the private sector to improve maternal, newborn, child health, and nutrition. My name is Kaylin Ostrowski, and I am the Program Associate here at the Wilson Center's Global Health Initiative, and I have the distinct privilege of coordinating our Maternal Health Dialogue series. It is a real pleasure for us to be co-hosting today's event with PATH, and I would like to take this time to thank Ariana Di Lorenzi for her assistance in coordinating today's meeting. For those of you who are not familiar with the Wilson Center's Global Health Initiative, today's meeting is a part of a larger Maternal Health Dialogue series. We are co-convening with the Maternal Health Task Force, United Nations Population Fund, and technical assistance with USAID. And today, we are very pleased to announce that with generous support from the Maternal Health Task Force, the 2011 iteration of the Maternal Health Dialogue Series will travel to Africa, where we will co-host 2 dialogue workshops on neglected maternal health topics. We hope to announce additional details about the U.S. and Africa programming on our website soon, so please stay tuned as we will officially kick off this new series next month. Now, before I turn the floor over to Kari, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are webcasting this meeting live, so during the Q&A, please do wait for a colleague of mine to bring a microphone over to you, and please announce your name and affiliation. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kari Stoever. She is the Senior Advisor of the Global Advocacy at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, who is chairing today's discussion. Again, a very warm welcome, and thank you for coming. Kari.
Thanks, everyone. I was going to say, everybody should move up, and then we can have a roundtable discussion. But thank you for coming today. And as she mentioned, I work for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. My background actually is in health. Nutrition is new for me. But the target population we're talking about today, maternal and children, has always been a focus of my work. Today, I think we'll touch on several topics, but primarily the role of the private sector in solving some of these challenges around health in the developing world, health systems, what the role of the private sector is, and how some of our partners here have been engaging with them, some of the case studies of successes, challenges, et cetera. So I hope to have a very open dialogue. Each speaker will go for about 15 minutes or so, or less, if they choose. And then we'd like to open it up for questions. So a little bit about the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. First is a mandate. We are the sole nutrition-focused alliance in the world. There are a lot of actors that work in the nutrition space, but we were born out of the 2002 UN General Assembly on Children. We sat within the UN for a while until we broke out and became a Swiss-based organization. We're in 25 countries, and we reach about 400 million people a day with improved products. And we do that by working with over 600 private sector partners. Some are multinationals, some are local millers, some are small to medium-sized enterprises operating at a regional level, and we enact change primarily through market-based approaches. And some of the key lessons that I've learned in my short tenure, again, is that these are challenging and dynamic partnerships to pull together. But when you look at sustainability, impact, and effectiveness, they can also be great levers of change, particularly in an environment where we have constrained global resources for health and nutrition. So, within the infant and child nutrition space, I'll just give a couple examples and turn it over to my colleagues. We did receive a generous grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to experiment with looking at developing what we call complementary foods. These are baby foods. It's well known in the developed world. There just isn't a market for these outside of the top tier urban markets where there's areas, retail outlets to purchase Nestle products and other baby food manufacturers. And so we looked at developing this market, and we said, what are the best mechanisms to reach the poor with these complementary foods enhanced with micronutrients, et cetera. And so recognizing that the role of the private sector really had to come into play when it comes to food and nutrition. The private sector is a major player. As a matter of fact, 70% of the poor purchase their food from the market. So we we invested in small to medium-sized enterprises in about 10 countries. We'll reach about 19 million children. And we've done this more in line with private equity or venture capital or grants and loans. And this has been pretty effective in scaling up operations efficiently. Those grants will probably run for another 5 years, and the sustainability objective is really to have these programs run through the corporations that we've invested in these 10 countries then sustainably. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague here, Laura. If you could speak to your experience working with PATH and other partners.
Sure. My name's Laura McLaughlin, and before I start, I want to make sure and thank you all for organizing this event and for inviting us. We're honored to be here and honored to be a part of this community. It's really exciting things are happening. Also, I'm here with Kevin Gallagher, who's the Director of Government Affairs over here, and might refer to him later on. So I'm going to talk about the private sector perspective on improving access to safe water, and bringing innovative solutions to improve health, in particular child health and maternal health. The problem that we're addressing in the project that I'm going to highlight today is access to safe drinking water and diarrheal disease, and this is a huge problem, particularly in children. 1 in 5 children die of diarrheal disease annually, and this translates to 5,000 children each day. It's an enormous problem, and something that's really interesting about this problem is that it's preventable. We know how to make water safe. We know how to improve sanitation, and so it's access is a big deal, and that's something that we've worked on a lot with PATH. PATH has helped us understand the need. So Cascade Designs is an outdoor company. We've been in Seattle for almost 40 years now. We're known for our brand names like Thermarest, Mountain Safety Research, and Sea Align. We have 40 years of commercialization, manufacturing, and design experience in product development. And we're trying to leverage some of these systems into products that address the needs in the developing world. About 15 years ago, we started a military R&D group that allowed us to develop technologies that really were much different than were required in the outdoor market. It allowed us to really shoot for the stars in terms of technology, and it actually brought access to more technologies than we had before, that we wouldn't have been able to get access to them otherwise. And both our outdoor markets and our military market work has contributed to our work in emerging markets in the developing world, and in particular in the project I'm going to highlight today that we worked on with PATH called the Smart Electrochlorinator. We were inspired to start doing work in emerging markets following our efforts in philanthropy. The outdoor industry, and Cascade Designs in particular, has always been very active in philanthropy and in responding to disasters and global crises when we could. Following the 2004 tsunami, we had a particularly inspiring experience when we sent a team of employees to distribute some water purifiers to disaster victims in Sri Lanka. And there were two key lessons that really hit home after this experience. First of all, the need was immense. We donated about $100,000 worth of equipment, and it was a huge decision in our company. It went all the way up to the owner and the president of the company. It was a big deal for us to give this large of a donation. And when we went into the field, we observed how small of the need that addressed. It was tiny. The need is huge. And so we wanted to make a bigger difference than we could do with philanthropy. Philanthropy wasn't enough, so we started to look for ways that we could leverage our strengths into improving access to safe water. And that's one of the ways that we got connected with PATH. Another lesson, a really important lesson that came from this, is products need to be designed specifically for the end user, particularly when it comes to children and women. There's a lot of times they're left out of the design process. We weren't thinking of disaster victims as customers. When we were working in philanthropy, we were actually distributing an outdoor product. So we learned a lot about making the need to address ease of use for the end user. Since this work, we've partnered with PATH, and we've learned a lot about the community, about emerging markets, and about safe water, and are trying to address an unmet market need. The Smart Electrochlorinator project is a project. It's a development project that we started with PATH, and we worked to develop this beta prototype, which I'll run for you in a little bit and highlight a little bit more in a minute. PATH identified a gap between, they had been working on safe water issues, and in their work, they identified a gap between household solutions that are available for the families and the people that can afford to buy them off the shelf, and municipal systems that are available to the communities that have access to a large capital investment to build and maintain them. And there's a huge gap in between households and municipal systems that have very few options in terms of treating their water. And so that was the market that we set out to address with this project. Cascade Designs has access to, from our military work and from our outdoor work, we have access to a wide variety of water treatment technologies, and we identified electrochlorination as a solution that might be able to address this gap in the market. So that was where the project started. Cascade Designs plays the role of, we're a commercialization partner. We implement our manufacturing and our design and our financing processes on products like the Smart Electrochlorinator in the developing world. It's interesting that the processes that we've developed over the past 40 years, we find do apply. The questions need to be asked, though the answers are very, very different. The markets are different, the distribution systems are different, and the supply chains are quite different. But it's very important to ask the questions and to apply the tools. That's helped us a lot. Let's see, this is the Smart Electrochlorinator. It was originally funded, there was seed funding from the Laird Norton Family Foundation, and then it was funded by the Lemelson Foundation to get to this point. I'm actually going to run it for you guys. It operates using a 12-volt car battery. This is actually a demonstration battery, so it's a little smaller than what you would actually see in the field. And this is salt brine. So you fill it up to this line with salt, and any kind of table salt will work. And then you fill it the rest of the way with water. And I used tap water, but you can use any kind of water. It doesn't need to be purified. So you pour water into, there's a line on this system right there. And then I'm going to hook it up to the battery. And if you hook it up backwards, it's okay. I've done that before. And then you just push the start button. And you can see it flashed, which indicates that it got that I pushed the button. It knows it has to do something. And then it runs for about 5 minutes and produces a batch of chlorine-like solution. It's actually a little stronger than chlorine, that can treat this size of a dose can treat a 200-liter rainwater collection barrel, or it can be dispensed into 20-liter jerry cans. And you might smell a little bit of chlorine for an authentic experience. So I can actually really smell chlorine. Excuse me. So the product employs the MIOX technology, which is a technology that's been around for about 20 years, and it's installed and it's used in municipal systems in the United States and abroad. It's a well-proven technology. It produces chlorine, which is we recommend following the CDC Safe Water System protocol. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're providing an easier way for people to get chlorine. CDI has manufactured an electrochlorinator product in the outdoor market and in the military market for over 8 years. So we've learned quite a bit about the manufacturing processes and how to work with electrochlorinators in markets, and have been able to kind of jive our knowledge with PATH's knowledge in the developing world water system. It's also the standard issue water purifier for the Marine Corps. Some advantages of this system over existing options are It's very simple. It's difficult to do it wrong. So PATH has really taught us to, they drill it into us. They want it to be impossible to do it wrong. And it's close to impossible to do wrong. So if you don't add enough salt, a salt indicator light comes on and the system stops, and you have to act. You have to do something to figure out why. It's a purple light, which aligns with the purple salt icon, but at least you can't do it wrong and not realize that you've done it. It's affordable. The price target is $100, which is a couple of orders of magnitude lower than most kiosk technologies out there. They usually range from $3,000 to $25,000. And it's really easy to resupply. It takes just salt and batteries. You don't have to depend on a truck to come by with chlorine or refill or filters or anything like that. And it's a transformative technology. There's a lot of communication with the operator and with the end user. You can see it, you can hear it, you can smell it. You can tell if your water is safe. It also, this technology, the ability to treat a large amount of water and the low cost target lends itself to an entrepreneurial business model, which is something that which is a goal for everybody, something that we're striving for. Other market segments that PATH is encouraging us to look at are disaster response, schools, rural clinics, refugee camps, and then community-supported kiosks as well. And some of these market segments are synergistic. They help each other. So overall, NGOs and the private sector are quite different. And this is an example of a project where our backgrounds were very synergistic. NGOs have different strengths and a different perspective than the private sector. And we've found an area where we can really complement each other. NGOs often have a good understanding of the need. PATH has had some very strong connections in the field that has helped us. We're an outdoor company, go into the middle of Africa and carry out field testing. And their perspective is different. For example, PATH was interested in developing products that improve health versus developing products that will sell. The private sector is good at efficiency, we're good at cost effectiveness, and we're good at meeting market demands and being iterative and responding to the needs that are out there. And it's been an excellent opportunity to combine those and really push each other to reach an end goal. So the partnerships have really multiplied our strengths, and it's been a really good experience we've made a lot of progress in reaching people that haven't been reached before.
Thanks, Laura. Before we go on to Hugh, just a quick question. How many of these units are being utilized out there in the field?
There's about 10 field sites right now in Africa and Asia that are running. We have one entrepreneurial field site that is there. The operator is selling water to her neighbors, and she's making profits. During phase 2, we would like to validate the entrepreneurial model that would be very powerful in terms of increasing access to safe water in these small communities. So we're looking for MFI partners and field partners that can validate, that can use the system.
Great. Okay, Hugh?
Thank you.
It's off.
It turned it, yes. Do you
guys can smell it out there.
I can certainly smell the chlorine. Thanks, Kari, and thank you, Kaylin and Ari, for inviting us here to speak. For those of you who aren't familiar with PATH, PATH is a global health organization. We've been around for over 30 years, based in Seattle. We have 3 parts to our mission. The first is advancing technologies. The second is strengthening systems, and the third is encouraging healthy behaviors. And they really work together to support each other. We have probably one of our core competencies in innovation and advancing technologies, but throughout our history, one of the things that we've recognized is that in order for technologies to realize their potential, that the health systems which are targeted by those technologies need to understand how to adopt those technologies, need to have healthcare workers that are trained to use them, and that the beneficiaries of those technologies need to understand how their behavior can either enhance or detract from the benefits that those technologies may be able to yield. So we feel like in order for us to pursue one of our distinct core competencies, innovation, that we also have to build the complementary skills of working with governments and health systems and working with the beneficiaries to educate the whole system about what the potential is for technology to address a particular problem. I think Laura did a great job in explaining that one of the reasons that we work so closely with the private sector, which we have done since the beginning of being founded, is because we recognize that there's an efficiency of resource usage that comes in building bridges between the public sector and the private sector. As Laura was describing, the private sector is great at being efficient manufacturers, at applying design processes, and at building business models that allow sustainability. PATH is an organization that really understands global health, understands the low resource settings in which the health needs to be achieved, and can provide organizations like Cascade Design or large companies like GSK the information to understand how they can take some of their technologies and really increase the potential for those technologies to benefit global health. PATH recognizes that in order for that to be sustainable, those companies need to earn a profit. So we are not averse to profits. We just want to make sure that it's reasonable and that there is a way to get those technologies to the people who need them most. So one of the things that I thought I'd do, just sort of, again, as way of background, we work in over 70 countries. We have about 1,000 staff worldwide that are based in Washington, D.C., in Seattle, and then we have field staff that are in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in Latin America. So we combine some of the innovation resources with on-the-ground presence to really understand how we can best address issues in global health, and in particular, which issues are best addressed by technologies and which issues aren't really amenable to technology solutions, where we look at innovation in other areas, innovation in healthcare delivery or innovation in models for reaching patients. So I thought I might just spend a couple of minutes and talk about how PATH approaches our private sector work through a couple of examples. We have in fact, I think since the beginning, received funding from the U.S. government through USAID. We have been the beneficiary of funding through the Health Tech program, which Laura has been associated with. And through that program, we've developed a number of different technologies that target and help maternal and child health. Things like injection technologies, the solo shot, which is a single-use syringe used in immunization programs. That was important both to simplify the administration of vaccines and immunizations, but also to ensure that syringes didn't get reused and therefore diseases retransmitted through the reuse of those syringes. We also worked with health tech funding to create our vaccine vial monitors. I say ours, they're actually not ours. Whenever we work with our technologies, PATH sells none of these technologies. We rely on our private sector partners to manufacture, produce, and sell those technologies. Vaccine vial monitors are a very simple temperature-sensitive label that changes color as vaccines are exposed to additional heat and therefore become inactivated. That technology was actually developed by a small company in New Jersey that has shipped billions of these vaccine vial monitors as parts of the labels on the vaccines that are distributed to the developing world for children. And it really enables, I think, 2 or 3 primary advantages. One is it now enables health workers to realize when a vaccine is no longer viable, and they can dispose of those vaccines so that kids don't get inoculated with inactive vaccines. The second thing, which was somewhat of an unintended consequence of the technology, is because the health workers now know when the vaccines are inactivated, they can pull them out of the formal refrigeration cold chain, put them in some vaccines, be able to put them into earthenware jugs that are surrounded with water, and extend the delivery system out to the fringes of the health system, because they know when the vaccines actually go bad, and so they're able to reach more people than they could before. One of the examples that I thought I'd talk about is something that has recently you may have heard about it. It's our meningitis vaccine project, which is a project that we did in partnership with the World Health Organization. It spanned a 10-year period, But it engaged a lot of the different aspects of the way PATH approaches our private sector relationships and our approach to global health. Meningitis is endemic to a number of countries in Africa. It actually has occurred in the industrial world as well. In fact, there were outbreaks of meningitis, 2 strains of meningitis in the United Kingdom in the 1990s, meningitis A and meningitis C. The industrialized world vaccine manufacturers actually created a couple of vaccines to address those 2 things. And in fact, upon administration of those, the epidemics of meningitis in the United Kingdom disappeared. Those vaccines, however, cost somewhere between, I believe it was between $6 and $10 a dose, which was too expensive for the developing world. We conducted a number of consultations with the governments and countries in Africa to understand what the profile should be, what the target product profile should be for a meningitis vaccine. And through those efforts, we learned a couple of things. One is that there was a dominant strain that caused 80% of the disease burden in Africa, that is meningitis A. That for that vaccine to be used by those African countries, the target price needed to be less than 50 cents a dose. Now, less than 50 cents a dose compared to $6 and $10 a dose in the industrial world. We knew, and in fact, we worked with the existing vaccine manufacturers of the industrial vaccines, and they all told us they could not get down to less than 50 cents a dose. So we then undertook an effort where we looked at a number of different vaccine technologies. And we found a technology that was actually developed by the US FDA. And we transferred that technology from the Center for Biological, CBER, Center for Biological, I forget what the E is, and Research. We transferred that technology to a vaccine manufacturer in India, the Serum Institute of India. The Serum Institute. We also engaged a small biotech firm in Europe to create one of the components of the vaccines, and created that set of relationships between the private sector and our efforts with the WHO to create this meningitis vaccine. We worked with the Serum Institute of India to shepherd that vaccine through the Indian regulatory process. It received regulatory approvals last year in, I believe it was June, through the Indian regulatory process. It received WHO pre-qualification in, I believe it was November or December of last year. And starting in December of last year, then we launched a immunization campaign against meningitis A, starting in Burkina Faso. I believe it was a 4 to 6 week period, the WHO assisted and helped plan the immunization campaign so that we were able to inoculate 19.5 million people ages 1 to 29 in Burkina Faso against meningitis A. I think that's a great example. Oh, by the way, the price of that vaccine was less than 50 cents a dose. We hit the target price that we needed to. We addressed the primary cause of disease. We worked with the private sector to identify the problem, to describe the kinds of product profile that would work in the developing world. And we were able to work with them and the WHO to both manufacture the vaccine and plan an immunization campaign that actually was the first vaccine that was developed exclusively for Africa. Those are the kinds of relationships that we think are very powerful in working with the private sector. It utilizes the private sector's product development capabilities, manufacturing capabilities. It utilizes PATH's knowledge of global health and the particular problems and challenges in working in those low resource settings. And it produced a product that benefits not only the recipients of the vaccine, but also produces a revenue stream for the Serum Institute of India that is sustainable going forward. Those are the ways that we think the private sector engagements really can be powerful tools for global health and show the way that a public institution, an NGO, can work with the private sector to achieve those kinds of results.
Thanks, Hugh. Laura?
Great. Well, I'm very glad that Hugh went before me because I think he sort of captured a lot of what I was planning to talk about as well. I have quite the task on my hands. I think I'm I've been asked to talk a little bit about USAID and USG's priorities on innovation in private sector. We have both the Global Health Initiative and Feed the Future, which are two of the U.S. government's top development initiatives, and both of which really embrace innovation and private sector partnership as key principles. So I should have multiple hats here. I've been working, as you mentioned, with health tech for quite some time. So I'll talk a little bit about our health priorities and talk a little bit more about health tech. I've crossed off VVM and solo shot from my examples. I'll talk through a little bit of our health priorities for innovation in the private sector. And then I'm currently in the Bureau for Food Security. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our priorities on the intersection of agriculture and health as they relate to nutrition. And there's a tremendous role for the private sector to play in that agenda. And then I think I'll give you a sense, too, of there's a lot of new activity that USAID is engaging in, some of which you've probably heard of. But I'll just kind of review quickly where we are in terms of innovation. And then I'd like to end with posing some challenges, I think, because there's a lot of exciting opportunity in this space, and I think it's important that we have a conversation about what the challenges are so that we can hopefully work through them together. So just in terms of our overall priorities for USAID, we really look at innovation from a research to use continuum. So our top priority in both health and food security is how do we take research to the field? How do we ensure that at the end of the day, we are expediting the process through which innovations reach the end user? For us, that's vulnerable women and children. When I say us, I mean the nutrition community, the health community. There are a couple different aspects of that research to use continuum. The first is, as both the previous panelists have mentioned, is around affordability. So making sure that anything that we invest in is ultimately affordable for the population that we're trying to reach. It also needs to be culturally appropriate and gender sensitive. Easy to use, durable. I think we all agree that the analysis that goes into anything that USAID invests in terms of innovation is certainly first and foremost that it's responding to a major development challenge, whether that is postpartum hemorrhage or undernutrition. And both of you also highlighted really strongly, again, the need for systems. I think when we look at innovation, it's not just about the development of a specific product, but about the entire system that goes around that product. And that system for us is really key in making sure that the innovation is ultimately reaching the end user. And I think, too, and this is where some of the work that PATH has done has been so tremendous in terms of ensuring that whatever we're investing in is ultimately expanding reach to life-saving health interventions, to food security interventions, and making these technologies more accessible. Whether that be more accessible in terms of hitting lower wealth quintiles because of affordability, or more accessible because we're able to expand the cold chain out into more rural areas. For the Global Health Initiative, which I'm assuming everyone here has enough background on, but if you need to anything on the Global Health Initiative, the website actually has just launched, so feel free to go there. I won't go into any details about the overall initiative. I will just say that a lot of our investments in innovation, USAID, has been a partner with the private sector and with research institutions for decades. We have been working closely with PATH on the health tech project for, I think, 25 years now or so. And it's just been a stupendous partnership, and it's resulted in things like the VVM and the solo shot that he's already mentioned. I think one of the things to highlight there is that there is a 9-to-1 investment ratio in health tech of private sector to USAID funding, USAID and other donor funding. And I think that's really tremendous. It's not just emblematic of the fact that we're getting the private sector's money, but that it's actually a win-win partnership, that we're working together on things related to driving the costs down, to increasing market demand, et cetera. I just want to highlight one of my favorite examples, actually, from health tech, which is the nevirapine pouch. Which is probably the most simple technology you can possibly imagine. And yet I think it was a really good example of how we're looking to increase accessibility, drive the cost down. It is now ultimately free. So this is essentially a pouch, and I should have brought my bag of examples as well, but this is a pouch that actually is essentially just looks like a foil package. It has instructions on the outside. It's used in clinics to put infant doses of nevirapine when mothers come to their last ANC visit. It's sent home with the mother if she's HIV positive, and nevirapine is used to prevent mother-to-child transmission. And so this facilitates, for women who give birth in the home, this facilitates home use. Again, very simple technology. What we were seeing in the field was that health workers would be wrapping the small syringe in anything they had, cardboard, string, foil, etc., and most of the time it wasn't delivered effectively at the home. With this pouch, which is now available for free through the PMTCT donations program, through a partnership with private sector companies that make the syringe and make the drug, it's available to all of our PEPFAR countries. So I think it's a great example of something that is so very simple, but is really able to facilitate scale and reach, and certainly affordability. So, I think when we're talking about the intersection of innovation and private sector around health, there are certainly some of the higher end things like microneedles or a lot of the other stuff that is being worked on, but it's important to keep that the simplest of innovations in mind as well. That, I think, is a role for the public sector, because oftentimes private sector is a little bit more in the sort of higher end applied research type of investments. And I think it's important for the public sector to be able to really say, these are our priorities for our country. We may know exactly what works. It's not about finding a new drug or finding a new vaccine. In some cases, it very much is. But oftentimes, it's about a very simple intervention that can facilitate accessibility. Again, any additional information on the Global Health Initiative, there's plenty of other examples that are available on the website. I think that innovation is one of the top principles of the overall initiative. All of our countries, the GHI plus countries, which are now expanding, are embracing innovation platforms as part of their overall GHI strategies, and they will be looking primarily basing their investments on this research to use continuum. Next hat on the food security side. Feed the Future is the other administration high priority initiative for development. This is a comprehensive approach to food security. It includes the 4 pillars of food security, so everything from agriculture production, access to markets, utilization or consumption of nutritious foods, and nutrition practices, as well as stability or risk management. And so we're really embracing this comprehensive approach to food security. And I think what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of private sector interest in partnering with us and with countries to expand access to markets, to strengthen their own value chain programs. And I'll jump to one of the challenges. I think one of the very interesting things about this is there's a lot of excitement, and I think we need to do some serious work on actually capitalizing on all of that and defining exactly what the partnership looks like. And this is something we worked very closely with GAIN on, and that's very specific to the country context. So in some senses, the Feed the Future private sector engagement and innovation portfolio is a little bit different than and a little bit more complicated, I would say, than the Global Health Initiative portfolio. Because of the comprehensive nature of Feed the Future, there are a lot of different ways that we are looking to innovate, and a lot of different ways that we're looking to plug in the private sector. So one of the key issues on the intersection between agriculture and nutrition and health is around women's control of assets and income. That's something that we're seeing a lot of private sector interest in, but again, a need to kind of explore and define what that actually means. Certainly the private sector on food security provides a lot of employment opportunities. The vast majority of the workforce in all of our Feed the Future priority countries in agriculture is women, and yet oftentimes they are not the ones who are actually receiving the assets and the benefit of those employment opportunities. Particularly for nutrition, one of the interesting things is around behavioral practices. We see so often that in countries where you have high levels of agricultural production, you may be self-sufficient in rice, for example, in Bangladesh, and yet undernutrition persists. And there is not a direct connection between economic growth and agricultural production. There is not a corresponding decline in undernutrition. And I think what we're seeing is an opportunity to really work with the private sector and figure out how to make those gains in agriculture translate into opportunities to improve nutrition. One of the key things that we can do is around behavioral practices at the household level. So often it is the case that mothers and young children, particularly those under 2, have a completely inadequate diet and poor feeding and care practices in the household. So this is really an opportunity, I think, when we're talking about innovations, we're looking at that 1,000-day window of opportunity, and that I think is where we will be focusing on innovations that can really, and investments that can really make a difference in that window. This is something that Gain and others like Tetra Pak and other companies have really worked on, sustainable packaging solutions, and that in Feed the Future, we're engaged in every aspect of the value chain, all the way at one end in packaging and retail, but post-harvest is a big area where we're looking to partner with the private sector to figure out ways to actually ensure that that post-harvest losses, in some countries it's up to 40%, and most of the time those are the most nutritious foods. So there's a lot of opportunity to engage with the private sector there. We're under Feed the Future and the Global Health Initiative, the first element of any strategy on either innovation or engaging the private sector is based on the country priorities themselves. And I think that's the first place we start is by looking at where the policy enabling environment is for engagement with the private sector in particular, which can be a big barrier, and what the current status of private sector partnerships is in the country, and moving forward as a partner with the country to define their overall priorities. So just to highlight some of the things going on at USAID now, in addition to our ongoing technical programs like Health Tech and other investments that we have in CGIAR, which is a lot of agriculture research, and lots of GDA-like partnerships with agriculture-focused companies. We have a couple new things that I just wanted to share with you. Many of them I'm sure you've heard of, and if not, there's plenty of information on them, so I won't go into too much detail. But about 5 months ago, we launched the Development Innovation Ventures. These were essentially awards. We gave awards to 8 companies and institutions that were working on a very diverse set of devices and technologies. These are small grants, but have a sort of phase-in approach, and so we'll be looking to continue those investments, and there's a website for its DIV, and you can go to the USAID homepage, and there's a link right there. One of the other things that's also quite new for us is that we've been we launched just recently a grand challenge for maternal health, and I see Deb in the room, so maybe she can speak to that if there are specific questions. But we are exploring a grand challenges model with a lot of our other donor partners who are interested in engaging in various technical areas. So that's another thing that we're investing in. And then I think lastly, one of our top priorities is around partnership with developing country institutions who are, whether they are research institutions or private sector, local private sector companies in developing countries. We're really stepping up our investments in these overall partnerships. There will be a Partnerships for Enhanced Engagement Through Research program, and again, more information is available on the USAID website, but that will essentially look at funding developing country researchers to collaborate with US-based researchers. So this is, again, just to stress, this is a really top priority for USAID in every aspect. I've just highlighted health and food security, but certainly in other areas as well, we're really embracing these overall principles. If I can just end with a few challenges that we certainly are faced with, and I'm sure, through working with PATH and GAIN, and there are many of us are facing the same challenges. So these are certainly not new, but I just wanted to put them on the table at least. One of the big ones is around sustaining funding commitments. We know that research and development can take time, and that the public sector tends to be slower than the private sector. What we have tried to do through a lot of our private sector leverage is figure out innovative financing mechanisms that we can actually ensure that we're still engaging effectively and being patient enough. Patience is not always our strong suit. But we recognize that when it comes to innovation and when it comes to developing technologies, that it takes longer than a year. And so I think one of the things to explore is around funding commitments and what kind of innovative mechanisms can be utilized to actually incentivize private sector, incentivize researchers and developers. I think actually all three of us have touched on this at various points, but that's around the policy enabling environment. Varies drastically from country to country, but it does pose a challenge in many countries that we work in. Part and parcel of that is certainly the regulatory frameworks, which you mentioned as well. I think one of the other things is around the structure of the partnership. It needs to be win-win, certainly. It can't just be a donor coming in and saying, we want, I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical example here, we want X private sector company to make Y product and then sell it. It shouldn't be that. It's not that simple. It needs to be a win-win partnership for all parties involved. Most importantly, the developing country that we're working with itself, but very importantly for the private sector, it needs to be seen as not just CSR, but a sustainable market-driven model for them. Part and parcel of that is certainly something that health tech has done again, and that we're looking to do more and more of around demand and market projections. Again, creating a product is one thing. You've got to make sure that the market is there, and you've got to make sure that folks are there to buy it, and that the demand is there. And oftentimes, the public sector is viewed as being responsible for some of that demand creation, but I think increasingly we're looking at the private sector as well. Lastly, and again, we've all stressed this, but for us, multinational private sector engagement is critically important, but it's also critically important to build the capacity and to engage with local private sector and build capacity at the local level as well. Those are ultimately, the developing countries are going to set priorities, and building that local capacity is critical to actually sustaining any sort of partnership, whether it's on agriculture, food security, nutrition, health, etc. So those would be kind of my top line challenges. There are certainly many more, but thank you for the opportunity to speak. Happy to take questions or however you want to handle it.
Before I open it up for questions, just to the panelists here, I think today's World Water Day. Is that correct? Yeah. So we touched on water, food, and health, and I think what does a mother wake up every morning and probably worry about every day? Yeah, it's probably one of those three things, if not all of them. And we talked a lot about supply side, I think, and innovation. What GAIN has recognized is what you were getting to, Laura, in the demand creation side and more sustainable market-based approaches. And I think we're learning that we can't subsidize all these great technologies coming into the system. There has to be models, hybrid business models that look at maybe the public system and the initial demand creation, but then downstream, how does the market sort of make a play and even subsidize some of the costs that are incurred into the public system. So that's where we're doing a lot of experimenting on our side, is really looking at classic marketing techniques, things that the public sector might, sort of think are odd, but the same marketing techniques that work here work pretty much everywhere to their particular audience, but getting people to inherently value a product or a commodity or a technology and to sustain utilization really does take innovation in the marketing and demand creation side. And then also on the innovative finance piece, I think there's a lot more private capital flowing into these areas than there is public sector resources. So how do they work better together? I think that's going to be a big subject on the global level of how we look to see how we make the private sector resources. We're talking private equity, venture capital, some of these social impact investing funds. How do they work alongside these public health streams to improve access to these technologies? So with that, I don't know if you have any additional comments in that regard, or I can just open it up. Okay. Questions? Okay, I'll take two and then we'll answer.
Hi, I'm Ann Blank from the Maternal Health Task Force. I have two questions, actually. One is, I know we're webcasting this and it's all public, and you all sound like you get along with each other really well, and public-private partnerships are wonderful. But I'm sure that there are issues and difficulties, and without revealing your secrets, I wonder if you could just mention what are some of the obstacles that you've encountered in doing these kinds of partnerships. The second question is really for Laura. Is that your name? I can't see it.
There's two of us named Laura.
Okay, that Laura. You, Laura, with the chlorine.
Chlorine, Laura.
I was... When you said that one thing that you discovered after pilot testing that device is that there was a woman who was selling water to her neighbors, clean water to her neighbors. That's what you said, right? Yeah. I was surprised because when I thought you were talking about an entrepreneurial model, I thought you meant selling that machine to other people, not selling water, clean water to other people. And I wonder if that's what you all expected when you pilot tested this, and also if there were other unexpected, or are you looking for other unexpected ways in which this device is being used, and in the way people are adopting it in the countries where you're working? Because I think there's lots of experience in the development, public health and development community where people introduce some device or some piece of technology, and it turns out that it has a lot of unexpected consequences. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Scott Bledgy. I'm with the Bread for the World Institute. My question is for Hugh. Regarding the meningitis vaccine, you mentioned that in order for it to become practical, a certain price point had to be met. And my question would be, what was the amount of time between the discovery of that and the point at which that price point was in fact met, which made it practical? And then the second part of it is, how fast was the rollout to the field? And would you consider that with other technologies as being a decent amount, or was it lightning fast? I'm just trying to get a sense of technological breakthroughs to application in places like Africa. Thanks.
Right, you want to start, Laura?
Sure. I think I'm going to address Anne's question about the entrepreneurial business model first. So something that we've learned that we really need to push in the development process is technologies are great. They're fantastic. We can see them, we can touch them, and we like to demonstrate them and talk about them, but it's a really small part of what we're doing. It's about one of our project officer at the Lemelson Foundation likes to tell us that good work, everybody, good job. You're in beta, you're almost to low rate production. So that's like about maybe 5% of the work. You've got the financing, you've got the distribution, you've got the real work coming up ahead. And actually we're working on it in parallel with the development. So it's quite, there's a number of different distribution models that we're looking at. And one of them is the entrepreneurial model. And that involves, there will be a customer for the device, and we think that will be operators. It could be a franchisor. And then there will be water customers that are people actually buying safe water. The device is designed to be used at a point. One of these could treat water for, this makes a dose for about 10, 20-liter jerry cans and takes about 5 minutes to run. So it could provide water depending. We have a lot to learn about the actual human interface of the system and how long it takes, but it could provide water for 50 people a day, 100 people a day, depending on how quickly they can dose out water. But it is very complicated, and it's there's a number of customers. There's the water customers. There's a couple of different ideas about selling doses versus selling water, and it's all working. It's all working into the system, and all being developed and learned about along with the technology and the product. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So I'll take on your first question as well as address some of the issues around MVP. Clearly in 30 years of doing this, we've had a number of partnerships that have gone south. And I think that when I think about those situations, there are a couple of common threads that come out. The most common thing, which may sound too general, but it is essentially a conflict in goals, where we have a goal and a belief that we can achieve the goal by doing certain things, and our partners actually don't believe we can get there. The most concrete way that comes out is when we get to discussions of global access, and we use the term global access at PATH to describe three things. One is pricing and affordability. The second is intellectual property ownership. And the third is supply. In exchange for the philanthropic funds that we bring to a partnership, we negotiate for those three terms. As I mentioned, PATH does not sell any of these products. We don't receive any royalties, even in some cases where we've developed the intellectual property, we receive no royalties back, because we don't ever want there to be any perceived conflict of interest in the global health community that we are advancing something because of financial returns to PATH. That said, what we will do is we will negotiate for pricing concessions. We will negotiate for supply agreements. We will negotiate for intellectual property rights. And the further a product gets along in its development path, and the more likely it is that both either PATH or our partner has a good understanding of what the real costs of manufacturing might be, what the real opportunity in terms of a market size might be, those tensions can sometimes increase. And so when you're early in a research project, everybody feels great because we can see whether we think this thing is going to work or not. But as we get closer to the time when we see the real potential for it and we understand some of the real constraints that have to be met in order for that to have the impact we intend it to have, we get into some tough negotiations at times. And that's where we really see where the goals might be, as Laura was saying, aligned with a very much a win-win situation, and where one partner, either PATH or our private sector partner, feels that it's not aligned well enough and we have to walk away. With respect to your question about the meningitis vaccine, when we started, we thought we could take one of the existing vaccine technologies and hit the price point. And we spoke with a number of different vaccine manufacturers that created that original or some of the existing vaccines. we developed a lot of technical expertise in understanding that vaccine technology, and we felt like we found a technology that we thought could achieve the price point. None of the existing manufacturers wanted to shift their manufacturing process to a new technology, and therefore we then pursued a manufacturer, the Serum Institute of India, which was willing to adopt a new platform, and in fact played into, again, a win-win situation, because they wanted access and they wanted the transfer of that new technology to their vaccine manufacturer. They could use it for some future vaccines that they were looking at. So I would say it took us about, the first 2 to 3 years of the project where we thought we had identified what the right technology was. We engaged with various manufacturers and realized that none of the existing manufacturers would switch technologies, and then engaged the Serum Institute of India. In terms of the rollout, I think, and some of the other PATH folks here could verify this, but I'm pretty sure that was the fastest rollout of a vaccine in the history of Africa. 20 million doses in the first 4 weeks after received WHO pre-qualification is unheard of. And the reason that it was able to be done so successfully was because of our partnership with the World Health Organization. They were responsible for, in our partnership, aligning the immunization programs in Africa to get the healthcare workers ready, to get the systems ready, to identify the target populations. And we worked jointly with them to secure the financing that was going to be required in order to enable that first deployment.
Laura, did you want to comment?
Sure. I just had a couple and kind of what the obstacles are. I think everything that was just said, plus sort of 3 additional ones. I mean, one is around the defining. One of the things we're really struggling with right now on food security is defining the value add of every partner. So if you have a private sector company that is willing to engage in the space of, whether it's post-harvest processing or somewhere else on the value chain, or, is going to plan to manufacture a new product, what's the public sector role? Where do they fit in? What are the distribution mechanisms like? I think what we're really trying to do is set up those partnerships from the beginning in a way that very clearly defines roles and responsibilities and value add of every partner. And I think that it's not always as clear as it would seem, and oftentimes it leaves us in a position of, well, what do you need USAID for? And oftentimes they're saying we do need USAID, but there needs to be a negotiation on that. I think another one that's been alluded to certainly is the incentive structure. Comes back to financing. What are the incentives? Is there an opportunity to do pre-market commitments? And a lot of that comes around patients. And that would sort of lead to my last point, which is, of course, coming from a donor perspective, we are constantly having to measure the impact of what we do. And measuring the impact of things that require patience is a challenge, particularly in light of the current budget environment. And I think that one of the biggest obstacles we have faced and will face is that I think all of us in the room, and certainly all of our funders, and see the value absolutely in investing in this kind of thing. Whether it's a new innovation for health or a new private sector partnership. But these things take time, and how are we documenting the impact of those partnerships in a way that doesn't sound too process-laden? And I think that if anyone has suggestions in terms of indicators or benchmarks, milestones, we've been doing a lot of thought about what those milestones might look like to demonstrate progress moving forward. But I think that's going to be one of our biggest obstacles in the next 2 years in particular.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for a nice presentation. I was just curious to know about the program going on with the Cascade design, and I wanted to know, how do you integrate your program with other generic behaviors like hand washing campaigns and all that? which are also more helpful in improving health and reducing diarrhea diseases. Thanks.
Before she answers, is there any other questions? We can take a couple. Yeah.
Hi, I had a question about the regulatory process. So I know it's a challenge, and when you talk about public-private partnerships, particularly with product development, that's such a significant one, and so many countries don't have the capacity around for the regulatory review and approval in country. And I know in the past USAID has really supported some great work on capacity building around regulatory systems. And I'm just curious if that's something that that you're focusing on as part of the GHI and some of your work. And if so, if you could say a little bit about that.
Anyone else? One more before we go. Okay.
Failure. And when do you call it, this isn't going to work? So I'm interested in, I mean, I know Raj Shah talks about it's important to, be able to accept, it's not failure, he doesn't say that, I'm forgetting what it is. Well, something like that. Wendy Graham talks a lot about, learning from our mistakes, et cetera. So I'm just interested in, from the private sector perspective, maybe from GAIN, and from PATH, how are you evaluating, okay, this isn't going to work? And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Laura, you want to start?
Sure. Lorraine, Laura.
The question about integrating water treatment with other health-related programs is a really good one. And there's some, we're relatively new in the implementation of this project, so we don't have any field data yet, but there's been some really creative ideas that have come up, including there's a lot of interest in water in schools, and that's something that that could really have an impact on market creation. So there's one idea, one of our partners at World Vision thought of the idea of having devices at schools and sending kids home with a jerry can full of water as an incentive to go to school, and also as an educational incentive. That sounds like something we'd like to try. There's also an idea to one of the distribution or one of the market segments that we're looking at is rural clinics. And that could be used. So this it's an oxidant solution, kind of like chlorine. It could be used to clean surfaces. We're working on a Department of Defense project where the deliverable is actually, it's for military field kitchens, and they want to use it to clean surfaces and to clean produce. And so there are, of this particular product, there are sanitation and hygiene education applications that could go with it. I'm sure once we start actually implementing programs, when we get out of the prototyping phase, there's going to be a myriad of opportunities to combine. The attention that it gathers alone is something that may be harnessed and used for education, or combined with other treatment and education tactics. Should I go ahead with the other question, or? Sure. The question was about about failure and how do you pull the plug. I think in the private sector, we don't really call it failure. It's all kind of it's always an iterative process. It was actually, we had a learning in one of our first experiences with PATH. One of our prototypes broke in the field. And at Cascade Designs, we were like, oh, good, because that's like a big success, because then you know when it broke, you can control it, you can instruct against it, you can fix it, maybe. And so it's great. You want to break your prototypes in the field. And PATH was like, oh, this was a total failure. We were trying to improve health, and we broke the prototype. And it was a real learning experience to kind of like bring those two worlds together, because they both made sense, that we were just coming from different perspectives. But our design process we first go through alpha prototypes, and then we get field feedback. It's very important to get feedback at each step from the end user, and at each step we could pull the plug. If it doesn't look like it's going to be profitable or sustainable, or if it just doesn't align with our goals as a company, or PATH's goals in the cases that we have funding. then we can pull the plug. But we go to alpha, we get field feedback, and then we reiterate and go through the design process again and go to beta, and then low rate production, and then full production. And there's many opportunities for failure in there, if you want to call it that. But you can also, it's all a learning process and can be developed into new and amazing things later.
Thanks. Before I turn it over to Laura, I'll just mention on your failure, I think in our experience, it's usually a very slow death. And it's all this enthusiasm around the goals and objectives, and it's like falling in love. You just love each other at the beginning, and then it's usually really poor project management and execution. And typically, it's the wrong people on the team. That's what we've seen. So where are the individuals tasked in the working groups to work on the issue? So you get buy-in often at the very high level in the organization, shaking hands and holding hands and, celebrating the partnership. And then when it gets to execution and project management, where the rubber meets the road around execution, and that's where things can stall, and then you lose political will and you lose momentum, and often you'll just see this very slow death. That's been somewhat our experience of failure. Isn't usually a broken prototype. It's usually, oh wow, we haven't talked to this partner in 6 months. What's going on? And there's been no momentum, no action. Laura?
Sure. So on the capacity building on regulatory systems, absolutely we're investing in that. I think one of the great things about GHI is that the evolution of our health strategy has been away from a technical disease-focused approach to one where we're looking at the system as a whole first, and then the diseases as part of that system. And so part and parcel of that is looking in every country at regulatory capacity, procurement capacity, certainly human resource capacity. And one of our primary objectives, particularly in the first couple of years of GHI, which is, we've been investing in now since 2009, but in the past couple of years, really looking at capacity of in-country systems to do those kinds of functional things that the health system needs to do in order to make it able to absorb things like new technologies or new products, et cetera. So absolutely. And I think, again, coming back to one of the key principles I hate the term principle because it sounds so fluffy, but one of the key things that we really are embracing around GHI is that this is a country-led process. That country is not just the government, but it is also private sector in the country, and it's also civil society in the country. And so how do we build capacity of all of those different kind of agents of change, if you will. And so absolutely, and it looks very different from country to country. In many countries, you see needs for capacity building on regulatory framework at the government level. In other countries, you may be focused more on private sector, et cetera. So it looks very different, but absolutely, it's a major priority for us. I'll let maybe Hugh tackle the failure question too, because I think in particular PATH has a really good model for the go, no-go decision making, and that's always been something that we've looked to. I think the private sector, the public sector should adopt more of that, actually.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we also believe that things can fail, and that in the technology development process, there are sometimes some very clear markers about whether something is actually succeeding or failing. In fact, one of the metrics that we look at organizationally is not only what things have advanced through our technology pipeline, but what things have we discontinued, because we think discontinuing them represents an efficient use of resources. Not everything is going to work. And so sometimes in the development of vaccines, for instance, you have very clear outcomes that you need to achieve at the end of a phase 1 clinical trial or a phase 2 clinical trial. And we know that not everything is going to get there. The key, as Laura mentioned, is setting up clear go, no-go criteria before you enter the trial. You need to know what you expect to achieve before you enter to be able to decide objectively at the end whether you've achieved that or not. The other thing that I think is interesting is that there is patience that is required, because there are some things that require some additional time in order for them to reach the success. So not only is there a science to knowing when something has failed and when to advance something, there's an art in knowing when to be persistent and when to not be persistent. that art is a much more difficult aspect of the failure management to handle. And as Laura knows, one of the devices that we've created that has, as part of the USAID Health Tech project, is something called Uniject, which has huge potential to change the way that injections are delivered and the skill requirements for healthcare workers in order to administer injections. But there are also some significant challenges in terms of the regulatory processes that product has to go through and the policies that need to be changed country by country in order to enable the adoption of that product. It can definitely meet a particular need, and we are being persistent in trying to identify how we can actually tackle those challenges. It's taken much longer than any of us would like to have happened, but we believe it is actually an important solution, and we continue to try and advance it.
Any additional questions? Yep.
Hi, thank you. It's very interesting. Could you address how or perhaps whether you are addressing food safety issues? I'm sure you're aware that contaminated food can also result in diarrheal diseases and other more severe stunting of growth, meningitis, cancers. And some of this requires technologies, canning, processing, packaging of food, and some of this requires changing the regulatory environment so that you're meeting the international food safety standards so you can build export markets.
We have one more question. No, okay. So who would like to answer that?
Well, I can say that we're very interested in food safety as it relates to the electrochlorinator. We haven't actually implemented any of these for use in food safety, but we're definitely learning a lot and we'd like to know more. I should talk to you afterward.
Like I can just say from Gain's perspective, one of the things that we're looking to do is build up laboratory capacity in Africa. You've got to fly samples often to test for quality and for safety. And so, and I know the European Commission is also very much interested in getting the regulatory standards more even to help to balance some of the trade issue with food security. So there's a broad acknowledgement about the problem, and particularly as it relates to the mycotoxins, the aflatoxins and whatnot, and both the post-harvest losses, but also the health impact of many of the contaminated food issues.
Yeah, just quickly to add on to that, absolutely recognize that food safety is a challenge, certainly here in the U.S. as well, and it's certainly a priority in Feed the Future. I will say that we have placed the priority in the initial years in other things, in part because the capacity is quite weak. And so we are spending time working with Gain and with others to get the lab capacity up, to engage particularly now in research around aflatoxin in East Africa, to address issues around post-harvest losses. I think it's critically important. I should note that Feed the Future is a whole-of-government initiative, and USDA is actually coming to the table with some really strong expertise on food safety. So in a lot of the countries, they've been playing a lead role in advising our country programs and the overall governments, whether it's whatever ministry it is, in those governments, which varies, but they've been very active in looking at how to strengthen food safety systems. So there's lots more information on that if you want it, and we can put you in touch with someone from USDA as well if you'd like.
And from the PATH perspective, some of my colleagues may correct me, but we don't really have very much actively going on in the area of food safety. We have nutrition programs that are underway, but I don't think that there are any food safety efforts that we're engaged in.
Okay, any final questions, comments? There's a lot of experience in the room, so if you want to speak to your experiences as well, that would be great.
Thanks very much. No, I don't want to speak to my experiences, but I want to ask the panel a question, if I may. One of the criticisms that's now being levied by a number of quarters, I think, is the fact that we seem to be entering into what has been termed the product pile-up. whether there are many innovations and technologies that are there ready to perhaps benefit the end users in low resource settings, but they're sitting there and they haven't been introduced or implemented and scaled. Can you speak to what you think the reasons are for that, and what we could possibly be thinking about doing to ensure that that doesn't happen in the future? Or maybe, the criticisms are unfounded and that's not the case.
Well, first of all, I think the criticism is quite founded, and so I would certainly say that I think, again, our emphasis is very much on not just the development of new technologies, but really bringing what we know to use and to scale. I think a lot of where our emphasis is now is on bringing those technologies, whether they're agriculture or health, off the shelf and into the field. I think the primary vehicle for doing that, which is both an opportunity and perhaps a reason for why it hasn't happened in the past, is the capacity of local partners. And I think that that's why we're investing so heavily in local organizations. And they're the ones ultimately who have strong distribution networks, who are able to, with some capacity strengthening assistance, who are able to absorb new technologies and move them into use. I think another thing really is around demand creation. I think we see a lot of potential. We see a lot of potential for certain things, but if the demand isn't there, it's not going to move off the shelf. So I think, again, trying to emphasize the system as a whole, not just the product, but the distribution mechanisms, working with local partner capacity to get it out into the field, to ensure that it is accessible and that the value is seen through demand creation. I think those are really critical pieces. Specific to agriculture, just in terms of what we're doing now, there is a huge number of agriculture-related technologies, whether they're biofortified crops or whatever, that are just sitting. And our partnerships under Feed the Future are primarily focused on moving those out. It's not about developing brand new plants that include every micronutrient known to man. It is about getting those crops out to the field and identifying, again, if the innovation is not around the product, but the innovation is around the delivery mechanism, even better.
I'd add to that, and actually I'd love to get Laura's perspective on this. When I think about some of the product pilot challenges, I have this bifurcated model where I think there are some things that are amenable to global adoption processes, and there are some things that are amenable to local adoption processes. And so things like vaccines actually have relatively well understood global adoption processes. You have to get WHO pre-qualification. You need to get the extended program on immunization managers in countries engaged. The WHO has a process for that engagement and has actually a set of experts, they're called the SAGE, that approves and recommends specific vaccines for use in globally. On the other hand, there are local challenges, things like I was talking about before, the Uniject product, which requires local policy changes on the part of different national governments, that requires local suppliers to be able to engage and produce and supply those products. So I think you have I think the product pileup is different. It exists in both areas, but the challenges are different if you're looking at sort of global products versus local products.
That's a great way to think about it too, and I would also add another layer to that, which is around the market that I see being also very different. I mean, on the global side of things, and this is something that we've been working with GAIN on when it comes to nutrition and agriculture, the need for the market not to be donor driven. And I think that that's something that we're still trying to sort through. And I think oftentimes you see if there is a donor driven market, you can move things more quickly, but ultimately it's less sustainable. And so, I definitely think that's a really good kind of framework for considering how these things move.
In the area of water and in water products that are out on the market, that is, I think, a big problem. There's a lot of technologies that are out there that have no place to go, no market, no distribution chain. But there's also the converse. There's a lot of products out there that are selling and don't work, which is also a big problem. And it's really complicated, and a lot of people are working on this right now. But I think that a way to address it is by implementing partnerships, by having strong public-private partnerships that are a good fit. That's a really important part of the public-private partnership. It's not just a public organization and a private organization, but it needs to align with everybody's business model or strategic model to really address these problems and incorporate distribution and retailing and manufacturing into the design of programs and of products.
Any final questions? Okay, great. Any final comments from panelists? Okay, thank you all for coming. And congratulations on World Water Day for putting your technology forward, working with PATH. Thanks, everyone, for coming.